What happens when one fearless voice shatters centuries of silence? When a US Congresswoman dares to tell the world that Africa doesn't need saving, it needs to be heard? Stay with us, because what you're about to witness left a president in tears, sparked a movement, and changed the course of 2 continents forever. Dear friends, what you're about to hear is more than just a story. It's a glimpse into a world where quiet courage reshapes destinies and dignity outshines power. These are the voices often missed by the headlines, but not here. If this kind of storytelling moves you, if it stays with you long after the screen fades, we invite you to subscribe and ring the bell. And before we dive in, tell us where you're watching from. We read every word. Now let's begin. It was a quiet morning in Ouagadougou, the kind that felt like any other day in the capital of Burkina Faso. The sun rose gently over the city's clay rooftops, casting soft golden hues across the presidential compound. Inside his modest office, President Ibrahim Traoré reviewed reports on agricultural reforms and youth employment initiatives. The room was still, save for the occasional rustle of papers and the low hum of ceiling fans. On his desk sat a worn, leather-bound planner and a cup of tea growing cold. Nothing seemed extraordinary about this day until a single notification blinked on his phone. His communications officer had flagged a video clip from an international summit in Geneva. It wasn't unusual for world leaders to mention Africa in speeches, usually full of vague promises and patronizing tones. Traoré almost dismissed it, but something about the alert's wording caught his attention. A US Congresswoman breaks protocol. Urgent. With a tap, the screen came alive. The image was clear. Jasmine Crockett, a black Congresswoman from the United States, stood poised at a podium. Her expression was calm but resolute. "We are gathered today not to discuss how the West can save Africa," she declared, her voice firm but rich with emotion, "but to acknowledge that Africa has always had the power to save itself, if only we listen." Traoré leaned forward, setting the tea aside. He had heard countless speeches, endured years of empty rhetoric from foreign diplomats. But this was different. Jasmine wasn't offering aid or advice. She was offering respect. The room seemed to grow heavier with each word. She spoke of Burkina Faso's fight for dignity, of leaders like Traoré who had resisted pressure and chosen sovereignty over submission. She spoke of Africa not as a project, but as a partner. By the time the clip ended, Traoré sat motionless. His fingertips rested gently against his chin, eyes glistening. A rare thing had just happened. A voice from across the ocean had not spoken about Africa. It had spoken with Africa. And in that moment, the course of his day, and perhaps his country's future, quietly shifted. Across the Atlantic, in Washington, D.C., Jasmine Crockett prepared for what she thought would be a routine diplomatic call. Her staff had scheduled it with little fanfare, a simple video conference with President Ibrahim Traoré. As she reviewed the talking points handed to her, Jasmine felt an unease she couldn't quite name. Bullet points about economic cooperation and trade partnerships filled the page, but none of them captured the deeper conviction growing inside her. She had spent the last several nights immersed in research, not just about Burkina Faso's policies, but about the spirit behind them, and what she found had moved her beyond the realm of political courtesy. The morning of the call, Jasmine stood by the window of her office, watching the city awaken. Horns blared, people rushed past, but in her mind was the image of villages in Burkina Faso where girls were learning to read, where communities were building sustainable energy solutions without waiting for Western approval. She thought of leaders like Traoré, who faced immense pressures yet chose to prioritize dignity over dependency. She closed her binder of talking points and slid it aside. If this call was going to matter, she needed to speak from a place deeper than policy. When the screens flickered to life, she saw him, Ibrahim Traoré, seated plainly in his office, the backdrop of Burkina Faso's struggle and hope lining the shelves behind him. His posture was firm, but his expression was open. They exchanged the expected greetings, but Jasmine felt the weight of a greater moment pressing down. She paused, took a breath, and set the pre-written remarks aside completely. "Mr. President," she began, her voice steady but edged with emotion. "I know we were scheduled to discuss trade agreements, but if you'll allow me, I would like to talk about something far more important. I want to talk about dignity, about the courage it takes to lead with it and the power it holds to inspire beyond borders." Traoré's eyes narrowed slightly, not in suspicion, but in focus. Jasmine continued, drawing from the stories she had uncovered, the quiet resilience of Burkina Faso's farmers, the children embracing education despite obstacles, and a leader who had stood firm when easier roads beckoned. She wasn't just delivering a speech, she was honoring a truth too long ignored. As she spoke, Traoré leaned forward. The air between them, though separated by continents, felt charged with an understanding deeper than diplomacy. Something extraordinary was unfolding, not a policy exchange, but a meeting of shared purpose. Jasmine's voice, though calm, carried a gravity that transcended political formality. "Mr. President," she continued, "your leadership has not just altered policies, it has altered perception. You have defied a narrative written long before either of us held office, a narrative that painted Africa as a continent waiting to be rescued rather than one forging its own destiny." Her words resonated in the quiet space between them. Behind Traoré, the muted tones of the office seemed to retreat as he focused solely on the woman speaking boldly from thousands of miles away. "I read about how you refused conditional aid when it meant compromising your nation's sovereignty," Jasmine said. "How you chose to invest in clinics and schools instead of following the prescribed paths of those who never truly understood your people's needs. And how, even under threats and economic pressure, you placed the dignity of Burkina Faso above the temptations of temporary relief." For a moment, there was only the sound of the translator's voice, repeating her words in French. Traoré listened, his face unchanged, but his eyes, once steeled by years of difficult negotiations, softened. This wasn't a typical exchange of pleasantries or rehearsed praise. Jasmine was peeling back the layers of distance and formality. She leaned forward slightly. "And I must confess, Mr. President, this is personal for me." The vulnerability in her tone was unmistakable. "I wasn't raised in halls of power. I was raised in neighborhoods where too often dignity was a battle fought every day. We share more than a diplomatic agenda. We share a belief that leadership is not about power or prestige. It is about service. It is about standing up for those who are told their voices do not matter." On the screen, Traoré's hands, resting on a stack of briefing papers, tightened slightly. His advisors, usually poised to interject, remained silent. The weight of the moment had stilled the entire room. Jasmine continued, "Your courage has given your people something priceless, not just policy but belief. And in doing so, you've given people like me, far across the ocean, a reminder of what leadership should be." Her voice trembled, just for a second. "In you, Mr. President, many of us see a mirror of what we hope to become." For the first time since the call began, Traoré shifted not as a head of state, but as a man moved beyond politics. He nodded slowly, acknowledging not just Jasmine's words, but the shared burdens they both carried. The weight of Jasmine Crockett's words lingered long after she had finished speaking. The connection between Washington and Ouagadougou felt less like a video call and more like a shared heartbeat echoing across continents. For a moment, President Ibrahim Traoré could not speak. The usual responses, the crafted diplomatic phrases, seemed inadequate. He stood slowly, moving toward the window behind his desk, where the soft morning light fell across the courtyard where school children often gathered. Their laughter used to be background noise. Now it was a reminder of what this moment truly meant. He turned back, his voice quiet but resonant. Congresswoman Jasmine, what you have spoken today is not just a compliment. It is a recognition of struggles that too often go unseen, of dignity that is too often denied. He paused, steadying himself. We are taught as leaders to speak for our people, but sometimes what they need is for someone to finally speak for them without agenda, without expectation. And today, you have done that. The room behind him, usually bustling with aides and advisors, was utterly still. Even his chief of staff, a woman named Aminata, who rarely let emotion cross her disciplined face, had tears quietly gathering in her eyes. Traoré continued, "When I chose this path, I understood the risks. Isolation, misunderstanding, the temptation to compromise when the weight becomes too much. There were days when even I questioned whether the sacrifice was worth the silence the world often gave us in return." He looked directly into the camera now. "But today, you have broken that silence." Jasmine's eyes glistened. She could see in him not just a politician, but a man shouldering the hopes of a nation that had often been marginalized, underestimated, or ignored. Traoré's voice strengthened. "I have always told my people that dignity is not something given by foreign powers. It is something we declare for ourselves. But now I see sometimes an ally can remind us of that declaration when we begin to forget." He paused once more. "You have not only honored my leadership today, you have honored my people. And for that, Madame Congresswoman, I am deeply moved beyond what words can capture." A hush fell over both rooms, one in the capital of Burkina Faso, the other in Washington, D.C., as two leaders from different worlds found common ground not through strategy or political gain, but through shared humanity. As the days passed after the remarkable exchange between Jasmine Crockett and Ibrahim Traoré, the resonance of their conversation rippled far beyond the walls of their offices. In Ouagadougou, news of the dialogue swept through the streets, from the shaded courtyards of village schools to the busy markets where merchants paused their sales to discuss what had transpired. Traoré's words, paired with Jasmine's courageous speech, had ignited something deeper than political discourse. They had stirred a collective awakening. In the rural town of Kaya, a teacher named Salif gathered his students beneath a baobab tree, their notebooks open, eager to discuss the speech they had all watched. "What did you learn?" he asked. A young girl named Aminata raised her hand. "That even powerful people need to be reminded they are not alone," she said softly. Her words reflected not only the children's understanding, but a sentiment that was spreading across the nation. Meanwhile, in Washington, Jasmine was overwhelmed by the response. Messages poured in, not only from supporters but from people who had felt invisible within systems that rarely acknowledged their worth. Activists, educators, and everyday citizens echoed the same refrain: "You spoke what we all feel." But Jasmine knew this wasn't about her alone. It was about the bridges built across oceans, about shared dignity becoming a global language. Back in Burkina Faso, Traoré moved swiftly to harness the momentum. He convened a national forum named the Dignity Dialogue, inviting local leaders, farmers, teachers, and youth advocates. For the first time, discussions about foreign policy, education, and innovation were held in public squares instead of closed government halls. If the world is finally listening, Traoré told them, then we must speak not as the silent, but as the sovereign. At the closing of the forum, Traoré unveiled a new initiative named after the phrase Jasmine had spoken so boldly, "We must be heard." It was a program aimed at amplifying the voices of Burkina Faso's marginalized communities, offering platforms for their stories, ideas, and solutions to reach international audiences. As the sun set on that day, Traoré stood before the gathered crowd. "We have been seen, we have been heard, and now, together, we will lead." The applause that followed was not just for him or for Jasmine. It was for a shared future, shaped by courage, empathy, and the undeniable power of speaking truth across borders. In the journey that began with a simple diplomatic call, President Ibrahim Traoré and Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett transcended the boundaries of politics and created a moment that would echo across continents. What started as a routine meeting evolved into a profound exchange about dignity, leadership, and the power of being heard. Jasmine's fearless words didn't just flatter a leader, they reignited a nation's belief in itself. Traoré, known for his resilience and quiet strength, was reminded why he chose a path of service over comfort. His tears were not a sign of weakness, but a recognition of the heavy, shared burden of leadership rooted in sacrifice. Their dialogue became a catalyst for change. From the villages of Burkina Faso, where young girls like Aminata learned the power of their voice, to classrooms and community halls in the United States, where students and activists found renewed purpose, this wasn't just a political conversation, it was a movement. The creation of the Dignity Dialogue and the We Must Be Heard initiative proved that true leadership listens, empowers, and uplifts those often overlooked. The lesson from this story is simple but powerful. Dignity is not granted by wealth or power. It is earned by the courage to see and hear one another, regardless of race, nation, or status. In today's world, where noise often overshadows truth, Jasmine and Ibrahim's story teaches us to lead with empathy, to speak with honesty, and to stand firm for those who cannot always stand for themselves. If this story inspired you, if it reminded you of the quiet strength within every community and the impact of speaking truth, please subscribe to this channel. Your support helps us continue sharing stories that matter, stories that empower, and stories that remind us that together we can change the world, one voice at a time.